This is Greg Troutwine with Maritime Reporter TV, and we're very pleased to be joined today by Gary Sarrat Jr., Global Segment Team Leader, Inland Waterways and Commercial Fishing at Caterpillar Inc., to discuss the new 1,000 horsepower C32B engine, a pair of which recently concluded a 6-year field trial on board a Mississippi towboat to validate its performance. So, Gary, before we dig into the engine details, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your role at Caterpillar? Also, as the lead for the inland waterways and commercial fishing, can you help us understand the scope of Caterpillar's business in those sectors using the metrics of your choice?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Greg. My name, as you mentioned, Gary Sarrat Jr. with Caterpillar Marine. This is my 30th year. I'm beginning my 30th year in the industry in various roles, working for the Caterpillar dealers, propulsion systems, equipment suppliers, and Caterpillar proper. So, in my current role as the Inland Waterways and Commercial Fishing Segment Lead, I have global responsibility for the health and strategy of those two very important segments for Caterpillar Marine. And so what I try to do is focus on the customers. What do the customers need? And align that with our product offerings to give the customers the best total cost of ownership, the best value that they expect from Caterpillar products.
So let's
Mhm.
talk about the C32B specifically. We generally have a more technical audience, so can you give us a full tech spec overview of the engine with insights on the specific components or systems on the engine that were either introduced or updated and modified?
Sure. So the C32B project started some time ago when we were working on trying to develop some higher horsepower ratings for our yacht, pleasure craft, and commercial and sport fishing uh, segments. And what we did was we worked on the base engine platform in this 32 liter size and tried to work on ways to squeeze as much power density, as much horsepower out of that engine as we could. Now that doesn't necessarily translate, uh, completely to the inland waterways segment because the engines in the inland waterways segment are generally continuous duty application, and they're looking for kind of the opposite of power density. They're looking for robust durability. And so one of the benefits of us developing these high horsepower ratings out of the C32B platform, which is indeed a new platform. I mean, shares the 32 liter designation with the current C32 that the customers are used to operating. But it really is a new design. And so, some of the things that we developed to be able to squeeze, a tremendous amount of horsepower out of that engine platform for pleasure craft, sport fishing, and yachting segments trickled down to us in the more continuous duty commercial applications. So, in order to push that power density on an engine platform, it's got to be robust. And so we made some design changes with the crankshaft, larger rod pins and mains to improve the crankshaft structural capability and bearing robustness. We have bigger rod and main bearing surfaces that go along with that increased crankshaft size. We put a lot more material in the block. The that aligns with the crankshaft and the main bearing size optimization for increased structural capability. We also increased compression height uh, to enable power density growth on the cylinder liners. On the pistons, we have increased compression height to enable that power density growth too, and we changed the top ring of the piston to a rectangular shape to improve efficiency there. We have increased crank diameter um, for higher power density ratings, and the connecting rod as well, as all of those components are matched and rotate together. On the top end of the engine, on the cylinder head, we increased the water jacket passages for optimized thermal and mechanical capability. We changed the intake valve and seat material for more durability and longer life, and then changed some exhaust valve geometry as well in that process. We integrated the fuel lines into the cylinder head to make it a little bit easier for maintenance and swapping those heads. So all of those advancements really when we applied these to the lower horsepower ratings that we use in the continuous duty applications for commercial ratings. What we found is that even at the same horsepower ratings that we enjoyed today with our current C32s, we had improved durability. We were able to extend overhaul life and saw great success in that part of the process. And when it comes to a segment like inland waterways operators, that increased durability, that increased time between overhauls, more time on the water, higher vessel availability, those are all the paramount things that inland towboaters are concerned with. And so that's where the C32B really brings some value to those operators.
I love that this interview is centered on a case study. And as I said at
Mhm.
the introduction, I understand that a pair of continuous duty 1,000 horsepower C32B engines were placed in a Mississippi towboat to validate the engine rating and its performance. So, with that, can you discuss in detail the test with insight on the client, the boat, and the area of operation?
Yep. So, as part of our new product introduction process at Caterpillar Marine, we do an awful lot of engine testing, and in the development process takes a significant amount of time, to prove out the engineering, the changes that we might make for an engine platform. And part of that process, once we're out of the lab in Peoria, we'll take those engines and put them into what we call a field follow application. So in this case, we partnered with ACBL, who's operates one of the largest inland towboat operations in the U.S. and one of the newest towboat fleets as well. We partnered with them to identify one of their vessels. We wanted to put a pair of these new C32Bs in and basically field test them. And that's what we did. We put a pair in about 6 years ago. We're not quite completed yet with the field trials. We're just coming to the end of it now, but a 6-year trial where we operate these engines in real inland towboat operations. ACBL operated the vessel as they normally would and worked with us, through the maintenance schedules and planning, so we can chart out when we wanted to come in and do planned maintenance, what the engines looked like. We have the engines digitally connected so we can see all the engine operating conditions at all times, and really get a really good data set on how those engines are going to perform in real world applications. And as we get to the end of the trial period here at the end of the year, I have to say we've been really, really surprised and pleased with how well the engines have held up in this application. What we're seeing with all of the advancements we made with the C32B platform, back up, some of the claims that we've been able to make about, up to a 50% increase in your time between overhauls under certain conditions. We've seen as we watch these engines operate and accumulate hours, and we went through the regular maintenance intervals, we started to share with ACBL, hey, we think we can extend this overhaul period for the top end overhaul, by X number of hours. And we don't think we need to touch the bottom end. We don't have to do a complete overhaul yet. Let's continue to push it out. And the vessel uptime in extending those overhaul intervals was a big deal for ACBL, because a planned overhaul event to take the vessel out of service to get those engines overhauled can be kicked down the road a little bit, a year or even more down the road. Extending that overhaul interval and just resulting in more uptime and better total cost of ownership for the customer. But in this particular case, the field follow trial wasn't necessarily expected to go 6 years. And currently, we're over 33,000 hours on those engines. And so, as we worked through the field follow process, when we got to the normal validation point to say, okay, this is our normal overhaul period for these engines, we can talk about concluding the trial. We stopped and said, wait a minute, at Cat Marine, especially for the inland towboat operators in this segment, what are they really looking for? Let's really see if all the advancements that we made with the engineering of this engine platform are really going to pay dividends for the customers. And that's when taking a look at, digitally what the engines are telling us every day in their operation, looking at oil sample reports, coolant sample reports, we were able to work with ACBL and say, let's continue to push this down the line. The engines appear healthy. The equipment looks good. We're not seeing anything, with red flags in our oil samples or coolant sampling. And working with them, we were able to really continue on with this field trial
when you look at that 6 year period, what specifically were you measuring, and what did the real world data show?
So in continuous duty, high load, high hour applications, like the towboat, most of the towboat industry, works in, the engines, operate generally with big load cycles, days and days pushing barges upriver of heavy load. Then they'll get to wherever they're going, they'll unload, they'll idle for a long period of time, and then head back downriver. So what we really wanted to see was, under this heavy load, high hour operation like a river towboat, how are these engines holding up, especially in terms of the cylinder heads and the intake valve life. Because if we've seen one thing in the C32 platform, and full disclosure, we're not running away from any of this. We understand that some of our customers in certain applications in the inland waterway segment have not had the best value that we expect to deliver to them out of their C32s. And most of that revolves around intake valve recession and the cylinder heads. And so we really wanted to push the top ends of these engines and see how the alternate head design, the alternate engineering, the alternate intake valve material, and the alternate exhaust valve geometry, how that was going to perform. And so we kept pushing the interval out, changing heads. We changed heads initially to see how the wear was projecting. Everything looked good. Put another set of heads on, ran it, beyond 50% past the standard overhaul interval. And we're going to take another look at these at the end of this trial and see how they're performing. And I will say this, we paid special attention to the valves on the heads on these engines, but we haven't done anything with the bottom end in 33,000 hours, which for us is fantastic. A normal interval in the books, would say 20,000 hours to a major overhaul for those engines, depending on operating conditions, because they do vary, and the operation and maintenance guides are kind of spelled out to cover all applications. So individual operators over time running these engines have kind of dialed in and learned when the right time to overhaul these engines are. But we were able to extend that, so far well beyond the 20,000 hour interval, running 33,000 hours currently on the bottom end of those engines with no issues. So we're so happy that we've been able to do that. And that really was the reason why we extended this field follow trial, and why it was so important for us to prove to the industry that the C32B, isn't just a coat of paint, on the same C32. This really is a new designed engine platform that we're pushing out to the commercial customers.
When you look at the C32B, what engineering changes in your mind distinguish the C32B from prior Caterpillar offerings in this operating envelope?
Yeah, so the engineering changes that we made with this platform, enabled us to add a lot more durability to the most important and most useful engine ratings that our inland towboat customers operate, which is the 1,000 horsepower at 1,600, 1,800 engine. But with the C32B, we also have developed continuous ratings at 1,200 horsepower, a B rating at 1,300 horsepower, a C intermittent rating at 1,450 horsepower, as well as the standard 800 horsepower rating and 1,000 horsepower rating you would see in your current C32s. And this is an important designation because as customers are working through their fleet and deciding, do we build new towboats, do we repower existing towboats, the C32B ratings that we've developed give customers the option. So if you want to build a new towboat, you want to push the power envelope a little bit, that 1,200 horsepower continuous rating would be great. That's at a tier 4 level. It comes with an airless SCR system, which helps with minimize the complexity of adding the SCR system on board a vessel. But they're also available in the 1,000 horsepower and 800 horsepower levels, which would be a tier 3 replacement label so that if customers are repowering a vessel, they don't have to automatically repower a vessel that was never designed for Tier 4 with Tier 4 equipment. You can put in the Tier 3000 horsepower rating in the C32B without an SCR system and operate your 2000 horsepower push boat like you always have.
When you look at major failure points that operators historically worry about, where has Caterpillar specifically hardened the C32B?
Yep. So as I mentioned before, the engineering design points that we really wanted to focus on with our commercial ratings, they don't necessarily translate to the pleasure craft and sport fish design that really, sparked all of this durability that trickled down to us on the commercial side. But the cylinder heads was certainly a key area of focus for us. We wanted to make sure that if you operated a pair of C32Bs, you knew that you were going to be able to get extended overhaul intervals from what you were used to with the current C32. And that's where we go back to the thermal dynamics of the engineering of the thermal passages of the cylinder head, the change in intake valve and seat material, the geometry of the exhaust valve and seat as well was changed. And all those things lended itself to longer life before you need to address those things with normal maintenance in a top end overhaul.
As I mentioned before, when we were talking about the digital component of
Mm-hmm.
this, many operators, as I think you may agree, may be wary of increased complexity in newer engines, particularly when emissions compliance introduces additional systems. So, I guess how have you balanced emission performance with mechanical simplicity and serviceability for operators who may not have that deep of a technical bench in their own house?
Well, the majority of the inland towboats, that are operating through our river systems now don't have marine engineers on board. The operations just doesn't demand that. And so what we've tried to do, is we've tried to make the engine, connectable, digitally connectable to the point where if the operator chooses, we can share with them all the engine operating parameters, all the engine operating conditions, and very much customize that experience for them. There are some customers and operators that are do it with me. There are some that are do it for me, and some that are do it myself. And depending on their desired level, we can set the digital connectivity up on these vessels, on these engines, so that we can fit in each one of those buckets. If you are a do it with me customer, we'll work with you, share the data. We can even go so far as to put the engines under service contracts through our dealers and with Caterpillar, where we'll have fleet managers working with the operations team at that customer to monitor the engines daily, monitor the engines over a period of time, just depending on how that customer chooses to operate. If they want to do it themselves, we can connect the engines, give them full access through a Vision Link portal, and let them see everything that's going on in the engines. They can have their port engineers log in and look back on historical data, real-time data, and do whatever they choose with that. So really, we have the digital connectivity portion of it, set up in such a way that you can use as much of that or as little of that as the customer feels comfortable.
In comparable
Mm-hmm.
duty cycles, what measurable fuel efficiency gain should operators realistically expect from the C32B versus legacy engines in this class?
So compared to the C32, the fuel efficiency really is the same between those two engine platforms. And there's an equation and a chemistry involved in this, right? So to really make gains in fuel efficiency, but still maintain emissions levels, maintain durability, there's a balance there. So in this particular case, with the C32B and the ratings we developed for the continuous duty operators like the towboaters, is we wanted to focus on the durability part of it, understanding that fuel is all of their largest expenses for these vessels. But we have really good fuel efficiency already on the current C32 product. Gains in fuel efficiency with the C32B may have had a give and take effect somewhere else. We didn't necessarily need to do that in this case. So the fuel efficiency is the same for these ratings moving forward from the current C32 product, but the increased durability, the time between overhauls, the greater uptime that the operators will experience running a C32B versus the current C32 is worth the gains for the customer.
It's absolutely amazing. So, again, maintenance intervals and service accessibility directly affect a vessel's economics. So, what has Caterpillar done specifically to the C32B design to reduce maintenance and or reduce maintenance time and simplify service?
Yep. So, the reduction of the maintenance time really was just a result of the added durability that was engineered into the platform for the C32B. The longer you can operate without a planned maintenance event or a major maintenance event, the more hours you can accumulate, the more tonnage you can push up and down the river. And that's really where, these customers make their money. They make their money by operating vessels and pushing tonnage. So the longer that we can keep an engine operating on a daily basis, sometimes 24/7, 7 days a week in a lot of these cases, without taking time out for maintenance on an interval cycle that may be a little too soon for the customer, that's pays huge dividends for them. And so really that was the main area of focus, is durability. We needed a durable engine that could push the maintenance envelope a little bit further and give customers more uptime for their vessels.
Inland operators are running aging fleets and they're thinking about repowers rather than new builds. How practical is the C32B as a repower candidate?
So if you're running current C32 engines, or you're running other engines at 1,000 horsepower, level, or an 800 horsepower level, this is extremely practical because you can come in using the EPA's replacement label program. You can go in with a tier 3 engine. You don't need to redesign the vessel. You don't need to squirrel away tankage for DEF fluid. You don't have to find out, where am I going to fit this SCR system? You can drop in tier 3, 1,000 horsepower C32Bs. They fit in the same footprint, the same power rating, same engine connections as the current C32, and keep running with a new life with a more durable engine platform. Now, that being said, if customers have, a desire, whether it's their own ESG initiatives or there's grant money to upgrade to a tier 4 level, we can certainly accommodate that. The C32B, can run at 1,000 horsepower to match what they're currently running with an SCR system at the tier 4 level, or that 1,200 or 1,300 horsepower ratings for continuous duty as well with SCR systems. So, our dealers are extremely competent, especially in the inland towboat segment, and they will work with the customer and the vessel designers and engineering teams to accommodate that fit, whether they're going in with the same engine platform and at the tier 3 level, or if there's an added level of complexity and they need to design in a tier 4 replacement. Our dealers and our engineering team supporting them back in Peoria are here to help.
Okay. Gary, just one more quick follow-up. The C32B, is it available for purchase today? If not, when will it be?
It is available today. We're open order board on all of the engine ratings that we've discussed. We're full go on the C32B as of the beginning of this year. And so we're looking forward, to getting these C32Bs out there and proving to the other customers what we've been able to prove in our field follow trials for ACBL.